I am a security guard at NASA. I entered an off-limits room, and it was the greatest mistake of my life. I work as a night watchman. I operate in a building owned by a government agency. They specialize in science and research related to space exploration. I work the night shift. This profession and the location-specific gig have been my main source of income now for 2 years. I have generally had nothing but enthusiasm for my job. The reason I was a candidate is because of my experience as a combat veteran. I had already proven that I was trustworthy to keep secrets. Things seen and heard that most of the population is not exposed to was far from new for me. In the first 6 months, I received training on how to check on every major part of the headquarters. I could not believe the freedom of mobility my superiors gave me. They issued my first master key, and my retinal scan was in their system. I patrolled a building divided into 4 sections. These were aeronautics research, human exploration and operations, science, and space technology. The science sector was further split into 4 more wings. They were astrophysics, earth science, heliophysics, and planetary science. I entered areas usually restricted from the public. I signed non-disclosure agreements swearing the utmost confidentiality. After these steps, I could go anywhere on the property. A lifetime of being an avid fan of Carl Sagan made me appreciate my access to everything. Granted, I was always on camera whenever I stepped into any of the main areas, so even if I did have an interest in bringing anything home with me, there was little to no chance I would get away with it. There was one titanium door I was not allowed to walk through, though. There was no label on its front, so I knew it was not an office belonging to any executive. There was also no surveillance camera in the vicinity focused on the door. I always wondered what was behind there. I can remember asking my trainer what the room held, and he moved on to a different topic. I did not press the issue. I was too new. I always wanted to ask somebody else, but on the graveyard shift, there was rarely anyone else there with me. I was the only security personnel. None of the top brass would be present during the ridiculous hours I kept. I came to form a semi-close relationship with one of the surveillance agents named Tom. He would usually clock in around 7 a.m. During brief morning moments, we established a rapport. I once asked him what was behind the door. I even had Starbucks delivered in an attempt to bribe him. It was once used as an archive of various life forms found in the ocean, he said with a shrug. Not completely sure. It's used for discarded down parts that engineering has no use for it anymore, if I had to guess. One night I walked by the door. Everything was completely silent. I would break policy and listen to a podcast through Bluetooth while doing my checks. On this particular night, I was enjoying nothing more than the sound of my footsteps as I paced the halls. That was when I heard a scream. I slammed my fists on the door. I announced myself as trained if they needed help. Everything became quiet again. I contemplated what I should do. Giving my director a call and asking for further guidance was a surefire way to irritate him. Still, my conscience did not tolerate the notion of ignoring a cry for help. My mind always went to the worst-case scenario. I retrieved my cell phone and called someone of higher rank. At first, he listened to my recounting. Once I gave him the geographical location of the entranceway, his tone changed. He became dismissive. "It's creaky pipes," he said. "Put in a work order for the maintenance team to take a look at it in the morning." My curiosity would not go away. I wondered if detainees from foreign lands were there, or it was something far more insidious than even I could imagine. My paranoia only grew. One morning when Tom walked in, I pulled him to the side. We spoke in a vestibule, which led to a computer room. "Part of my job consists of taking out the trash from every office during my shift," I said. "There's been many times when I've noticed that your wastebasket is empty, and I know it's not for the lack of paperwork you do. I know you've been stealing some files. I usually look the other way because I want to give you the benefit of the doubt, and I respect you." He looked at me with a dumbfounded expression. He tried to utter something around a bunch of nervous stutters. I interrupted him and continued. "The door that no one seems to know anything about has some sort of very real significance. I also don't believe that there are no surveillance cameras in that hallway. I think it's hidden. and if that's the case, I need you to secure it for when I enter it tonight. I need your help getting a master key to it, which I know you have. If you don't, then I'll report my findings. My blackmail worked. He slipped me a key with a handshake later on in the morning before I left for home. I had every intention of using it as soon as I could. I waited until the dead of night. The middle of my shift was the prime hours for isolation. I would exploit the lack of oversight on my shift. I took unusual routes to get to the door. I knew the action I was about to take could cost me my job. It seemed like the right thing to do. I slipped the card into the motion sensor. It blinked red at first and then turned a bright green. If they ever did a reading of the entries and exits for that lock, it would read the name of another employee. I knew it was not my friend Tom's. I wondered how long he had been pilfering such top-tier company-related property. The door cracked open. When I walked in, the chamber was completely black. I took a few more steps in. I found a fluorescent overhead light that illuminated the area with each step I took. A siren went off. The shriek made me feel as though my eardrums were about to burst. I looked around to see if any strobe lights were spinning, but did not see any. I turned around and saw another lock on the inside of the room. It was near a metal slab that held stacks of manila envelopes. I put the key into it, and the alarms ceased. Although I had made the trouble signal evaporate, I still expected men with guns drawn to crash in. I expected shouted orders to get down and surrender. I had a nightmarish vision of someone putting a black bag over my head. I knew they would bring me to a secret prison on an island in the middle of nowhere. I gazed around the room. Everything seemed primitive. There were large machines that looked as though they came off of a battleship from the 80s. They were rust-covered and grimy. There were so many metallic, spindly, and industrial contraptions. Cobwebs and dust blanketed everything. In each corner of the ceiling were large speakers, and they were not a brand I recognized. It seemed as though they were custom-built for this place. I turned the corner and peered into the adjacent room. I could not believe what I saw. A podium with illustrations of seraphim wings stood in the center of the domain. A circular glass encasement wrapped around the top. I approached it and peered through the translucent barrier. A horrible smell greeted me. I found another slot. I used the key once more to get the glass to retract and fold so I could see the contents on top of the slab. It was a thick stack of yellow legal pads. Each page contained finely printed chunks of text in fine calligraphic handwriting. I began reading from the top. I flipped through the pages. I found the author to be a well-known scientist I had small interactions with regularly. Within the last few months, the document began. I have received a series of acoustic sound waves. The scales I used to track their sonic trajectories gave me accurate measurements. I have determined that it comes from the asteroid Icarus. These readings make it even more difficult to capture. Their erratic and unpredictable distances are challenging. They formulated actual syllables, albeit unfamiliar ones. Their sound was guttural and diaphragmatic. There was a strange aggressiveness to the vocal cord projection. I transcribed each one painstakingly. I ran everyone through an archived database to see if there were any matches. My decision to do so was random and experimental with the lowest of expectations. What I discovered is they did form a language from here on Earth. It was one created by English Renaissance occultists John Dee and Edward Kelly. I gulped before I continued to the next paragraph. Very little fazed me, but something about the paranormal always left me uneasy. The tellings of jinn and ghosts in Afghanistan resonated with me. So did the evidence of curses after hard-fought battles which desecrated sacred sites. When translated, the text is cohesive in its narrative form. It follows a linear structure and manages to be comprehensive. It tells a very familiar tale for anyone who ever went to Sunday school. It is a first-person perspective story about an entity that claims to be a fallen angel. The angelic creatures, benevolent or malevolent, ended up exiled from their original galaxy. They stress the pure destructiveness of their power. They compare their threat level to Luciferian influence. I continued flipping through the pages. There was a variety of strange charts and glyphs scattered throughout. I went down to open one of the cupboards at the bottom of the podium and knocked the whole thing over. The scientist's body lay there in a crumpled position. His innards seeped out of his stomach. The carvings on his flesh resembled angel wings. I used to work night security at a zoo. Damned dirty apes, Ronnie cursed into the radio. What's going on out there? I asked, giving his quote a chuckle. I could hear the shrieking of the baboons in the background. The storm came down worse than what the pretty weather girl had said on the television earlier that night. In fact, it was the complete opposite. The wind gusts blew through the zoo accompanied by torrents of cold, thick rain. She said it was supposed to become a drizzle in the next couple of hours, yet it was intensifying. They're really agitated tonight. I don't know what the fuck is wrong with them, Ronnie answered back. Must be the storm. It's probably going to get worse before it gets better. Animals have a sixth sense about them, you know? They know when the shit is about to hit the fan, I said back to him and lowered the radio volume. Oh, come on, you know that's some pseudoscience bullshit, Ronnie shouted as I expected he would. It was easy getting under his skin when it came to stuff like that. He had no tolerance for bullshit, and that's part of the reason why we got along so well. We had plenty of time to get to know each other while working the day shift, and often walked around the zoo shooting the shit while telling the visitors not to feed the animals and occasionally dealing with an obnoxious or drunken patron. Everything changed the day after the first incident at the zoo. Several animals were found eviscerated in their enclosures and some were missing altogether. Security was ramped up in response, forcing us to man the night shift until the police could figure out what had happened. Neither of us minded being reassigned since our pay was slightly increased, and we wouldn't be dealing with the nasty heat in the daytime. Best of all, there weren't any visitors in the zoo. I'm kidding, buddy. Relax, I said, adding fuel to the fire. Fuck you, Al, Ronnie shouted and cut out. I walked underneath the awning near a row of snack stands and stayed out of the rain. I felt bad for Ronnie since there was nothing on his side of the zoo besides restrooms that would offer shelter from the rain. Hey Ron, why don't you hide out in the bathroom for a while until this shit blows over? Give 'em a good cleaning while you're at it, I suggested. Shut up, Ronnie replied in a whisper. Oh, come on. I'm just trying to help, I replied back, laughing that I'd gotten under his skin again. No, seriously, be quiet a sec, Ronnie commanded in a serious tone. In the time we'd worked together, I'd never heard Ronnie be serious about anything. I waited for what felt like hours for him to radio back. I was about to squeeze the call button when the crackle of radio static startled me. Get the fuck over here now, Ronnie shouted frantically. What is it? I answered back. Seriously, man, whatever you're doing, just drop it and get the fuck over here now. You gotta see this. Ronnie's voice wavered in the static of the radio. Though I was cold and soaked to the skin, I felt colder still when I heard him speak those last words. I'd never heard his voice waver like that. I'd never heard that undercurrent in it that couldn't be disguised. Fear. Be over there as soon as possible. Sit tight. The radio crackled, and I headed from the shelter of the snack stands back to the parked golf cart. The plastic roof of the vehicle did little to shelter the console from the pouring rain. Everything was soaked and dripping. I hopped in and turned the key, my hand shaking from the cold. I buzzed away in the silent vehicle, along the black pavement of the zoo paths toward the primate enclosures where Ronnie awaited. The grounds were empty and quiet, much too quiet. Why in God's name did we have to work on a night like tonight? Why couldn't we just stay in the office until this shit blew over, and now this nonsense with the apes? The thoughts buzzed in my head, and more I began to weigh how much I actually needed this job. When I arrived at the baboon enclosure, Ronnie stood by the edge of the cage, his plastic poncho flapping in the wind behind him like some kind of comic book superhero. I slammed the brakes hard and brought it to a dead stop behind him, but he didn't turn around. The shrieking of the primates was frenzied, high-pitched and perpetual, and set my teeth on edge. They couldn't have been too happy about being stuck out in this god-awful weather, but I got the feeling from what my partner had said it was something more than that. I hopped from the seat of the cart, and lightning flashed in the sky, followed by a boom of thunder, low, loud, and close. The baboons' shrieking intensified, and I felt like I was walking into that scene from 2001. I expected to see a giant black obelisk rising from the center of their cage. I came up beside my coworker. "Ronnie, what the hell's going on, man? What's got into them?" He still didn't turn his head. The pouring rain ran down his cheeks as he stared into the center of the cage. I followed his gaze and saw a swarm of the shrieking monkeys encircling something. They were feeding, tearing pieces of flesh and blood and ligament from an animal torso lying between them. Ronnie just kept staring his 1,000-yard stare. "It's human," he said slowly. "There's a human body in there." I felt ill as I glanced around the top of the enclosure. I figured that whoever's body was being torn asunder by a frenzied troop of baboons had gotten in from up there. There was an altogether too short railing at the top that opened up into the main level of the park. During the day, people could come and watch the baboons play from above instead of below. A few times in the past, there had been a few idiots who decided that they wanted to climb the railing to play with the baboons. There was only one time someone had successfully made it into the enclosure, but the guards were able to rescue them before the baboons got to them. This person hadn't been so lucky. "What the hell are we going to do?" Ronnie said blankly, staring at a rather large baboon leisurely chewing on a handful of flesh. I stood unblinking and uncertain of the best course of action. Obviously, we couldn't go in. Getting between a wild animal and its meal is inadvisable, and really, there was no point. The person in there was deader than disco. Risking our lives for a corpse wasn't a reasonable course of action, especially because we didn't get paid enough for that. "We better call the boss," I said, turning toward the exit of the exhibit. "I think we should just call the cops right away," Ronnie said to me as we made our way back to the small office where our phones were protected from the rain. The boss had told us clearly after the first couple of incidences that we should contact him first. He'd take care of it. Something about us not getting paid enough to deal with this shit. He was right. Reminding Ronnie of this, he didn't seem pleased. He started quietly grumbling under his breath, spitting the rainwater from his mouth with every movement of his lips. Grabbing my phone, I sifted through to find George. After several rings, his wife answered the phone. Her quiet hello sounded groggy from being awoken. "Hi, Mrs. S. Is George around? There's been another incident." My voice cracked. "It's pretty serious." She yawned. "Hi, Al. George said he was going into work tonight. Something about a problem with the security system. You haven't seen him?" Placing my hand over the receiver so she couldn't hear me, I spun around to Ronnie, who was looking a little pale. "You seen George tonight?" He simply shook his head. "We haven't. I'll keep an eye out." She yawned again. "All right, dear. You two be careful in that storm." The only option now was to notify the cops. I didn't like it, but damned if we were going to go searching for George in the storm. Ronnie seemed relieved, more color flooding to his face. "I'll call them," he said. "All right, I don't want to, but I'll head back to the enclosure to make sure everything is secure," I said as Ronnie started dialing. The office was close by and I could still hear the monkeys shrieking. I made my way to the top of the enclosure to double-check the locks on the doors. Realizing they were secure, I sighed and put my weight on the rail, tilting my head to the left in an attempt to not look down. My focus fixated on one of the trees, and that's when I noticed the piece of clothing that had been left behind. A few years back, George had gone on a trip with his wife. He came back with a red cap which seemed to be super glued to his head ever since. My stomach dropped and I sprinted back to the office. Flinging open the door, I yelled out to Ronnie, "I think it was George. Fuck." "Ron." His hat was in the enclosure. Ronnie froze with his thumb hovering over the call button, staring into the space I occupied. He blinked. "No fucking way." I sighed. "Yeah, way. I can hardly believe it myself." "No, I mean no fucking way. George never went near those things. You know, those damn dirty apes. He hates them." His hat was hooked on one of the branches with smears of brown and deep red. Apart from that, there was no way to identify the mess of viscera lying in the bottom of the enclosure now. "His hat was in there, Ron." He shook his head with a little too much conviction. "That don't mean a thing. Could have fallen off. Then maybe the wind blew it in there. Ron hit call and put the phone to his ear. I slumped in the chair next to him, barely listening to his requests for police and an ambulance. I shut my eyes for just a minute when the sound of the rain became cracks against the window. Hailstones fell and littered the ground with pale, icy beads. By the time Ron explained for the third time that we were on 5th and 8th, not 6th and 7th, the hailstones were as big as golf balls and slammed against the window, threatening to come straight through. The cries from the park changed from excited gibbering to panicked shrieks. The lemurs in the enclosure next to the office ran around trying in vain to hide under the trees. Hailstones crashed down against the bars, exploding into fragments. Some got through the gaps and hit the ground inside like grenades. The unlucky animals took direct hits, some reeling from broken ribs, some slumped to the ground with a bloody mess on their skull. The ones that found hiding places fought for the space, pushing smaller, weaker ones into the fray. Shit. Ron hung up. I could barely hear them on the line. The dispatcher didn't hear a word of what I said. This storm is seriously fucking with us. I think we're in here for the night, Ron. As the words came out of my mouth, there was a crash above us. It thudded heavily like it would break through the roof. The office shook with the impact. Then there was another one and another afterward. Ron and I both jumped out of our seats and stared up at the ceiling, expecting it to come crashing down on us at any moment. Those pieces of hail must be the size of freaking basketballs to make that noise, I said to Ron as we both went to the office door and into the administrative area. As we approached the window for a look outside, there were several more crashes on the roof. Neither of us said a word at what we saw when we looked out the window. Dozens of animal corpses littered the pavement outside the office as far as we could see. We couldn't tell what any of them were. Each corpse was a tangled mess of flesh and viscera. Broken bones ripped through skin and fur. They looked just like George's body in the baboon enclosure. Ron put his head down and puked. I was too in shock to do anything else but stare ahead and watch as animals continued to fall from the sky. It's fucking raining all creatures great and small of God's green earth. Ron looked up at me, his face pale, and wiped the vomit from the edge of his mouth with his hand. He stared at me incredulously. The pounding on the roof continued above us, a continual thump, thump, thump. I stared out the window and watched the rain of animal corpses hitting the pavement. Body after body rained from the sky with the hail, giant fleshy sacks of muscle and blood and grizzled guts exploding against the hard wet surface of the zoo asphalt and splattered everywhere. "I'm worried the roof is gonna come in," Ronnie said. His eyes were wild. "This is some end times shit we're dealing with right now, man." I dash. His proclamations were cut short by a sound coming from outside. It was a viscous, bone-rattling, monstrous squawk that was deeper and louder than any boom of thunder I'd ever heard. "What the fuck was that?" I said. "We need to get out of here." "No!" Ronnie yelled. "What the fuck's got into you, man? It's fucking raining animals outside." I didn't care. I ran for the door and burst out into the cold insanity that was the storm. It was a wasteland of carnage, animal bodies strewn everywhere, and the unrelenting hail and wind pounded me. Then I heard it again, that animal sound, that scream, shaking me to the core and making a chill run up my spine. "Al!" Ronnie yelled from behind and tackled me. We fell to the tarmac, and I looked just in time to see a giant hulking gorilla drop like a stone and explode into a puddle of gore right where we had been standing. "Holy shit!" I yelled over the thump, thump, thump of bodies hitting the pavement everywhere around us. "Thanks, man." Ronnie was frozen above me, staring up into the sky. "Ronnie?" I followed Ronnie's gaze. At first I thought he was staring at the storm. Then lightning flashed, and I saw what he was looking at. It was only for a moment, but whatever I saw was huge, flying on massive wings. Now that I knew it was there, I could see it, turning round and round in the sky. It was circling the mess of meat that had just splattered behind us. I glanced down at myself and realized that Ronnie and I were covered in the gore too. "Ronnie," I choked out, trying to remain calm. "Ronnie, we have to get back inside." Ronnie still had his eyes glued to the sky. He was whimpering prayers to whatever deity he worshipped. "Ronnie, damn it." I stood up and grabbed his arm and began yanking him towards the building. "We need to get back inside now." I heard the creature getting closer, the wings shaking the air, warning that death was only a few yards away. I could feel the beating of the wings and the shifting of the air. It squawked again, and I dropped Ronnie's arm to cover my ears. I looked at Ronnie again. He'd finally come around and was standing. The squawk seemed to shake him loose from his paralysis. I took that chance to bolt for the door. "Hurry up!" I shouted to Ronnie while he was still making his way back into the building. He slipped on the gore that covered the ground, almost falling over, but regained his balance as he bolted towards the door. A flash of lightning lit up the sky, and then there was the crash of thunder a moment later. Ronnie's eyes widened into pure terror. Another powerful squawk ripped across the air, making my ears' drums feel as if they were going to burst. Whatever it was that he saw gave him a second wind, and he quickly made it back inside. I slammed the door shut behind him and twisted the lock into place. The door started to shake a second later, as if a group of people were hitting it with hammers. The sound of wood splintering ran out through the office, and an ear-piercing squawk filled my soul with fear. I had no time to think as the window next to the door shattered and something flew into the administrative room. The impact must have dazed it as it fluttered around on the ground, trying to regain its composure. I felt a tug on my arm, and Ronnie dragged me away into the security room. "Did you see that shit?" I shouted, knowing damned well that Ronnie had seen it. There were 1,000,001 questions on my mind. My adrenaline rush wouldn't allow me to formulate the words that I was trying to say. I was hoping he would have some sort of an answer that would put my mind to ease as to what that creature was. "The sky. It's full of them," Ronnie replied through chattering teeth. I couldn't tell if it was from being cold or from fear. "I only saw the huge one and the one in the office," I said back confused. "I saw them all when the lightning flashed. They're circling above us. Hundreds of them," Ronnie explained. A cold shiver went up my spine. Ronnie sat down on a chair and put his palms to his face. He wiped away the blood that was getting into his eyes. I did the same, hoping to remove whatever I had on my face as well. "Coco," Ronnie said, as if figuring out the answer to all our questions in life. "What about Coco?" I replied. "Dude, that was Coco that splattered in front of us on the pavement," Ronnie answered with wide eyes, nodding his head in a daze. "Yeah, there were a lot of animals out there. The whole fucking zoo is splattered outside," I replied, still not understanding where he was going with it. "Coco is a 300-pound gorilla," Ronnie said, looking at me like I was an idiot. "I really don't know how that fun fact helps us right now," I said, feeling irritated. "Whatever the fuck it was that dropped him from the sky has to be about the size of a goddamn bus to have done that," Ronnie shouted at me while tossing the chair to the side and pacing around the room. He opened the desk drawers and ransacked them until he found a can of mace and tossed it at me. "So what do we do now?" I asked, hoping to calm him down. "We barricade the door, hunker down, and hope to God that they don't break through," Ronnie replied, while turning over the desk and pushing it against the door. I started to search the room for something else to add to our makeshift barrier and found nothing. We took our chairs and placed them against the door, too. We both sat there listening to the thump, thump, thump and muffled squawks between the rumbles of thunder. "Al, wake up," Ronnie said, shaking me out of my slumber. I didn't realize that I had fallen asleep. Between the sound of thunder and squawks, I didn't think I'd ever get to sleep, but my exhaustion must have won out at some point in the night. "What's going on?" I asked, wiping the sleep away from my eyes. The whites of Ronnie's eyes were bloodshot, and there were bags under his eyes. He must have stayed awake the entire night. "It's morning. The storm is gone. There hasn't been a thump on the roof in hours. I think it's safe, but I don't want to chance it going out there without backup," Ronnie explained, pointing at the mace on the floor next to me. We made our way out of the security office, remaining as quiet as we could. Ronnie led in front, holding an improvised spear made from a broom handle we'd found in the closet. I stayed behind him with the mace ready to spray anything that came at us. As soon as we stepped out of the office door, the smell of rotting meat punched us in the face like we owed it money. I tried to hold back from vomiting, but the smell was too wretched. I tossed up whatever I had in my stomach, and then we continued onward with our hands over our noses and made sure to breathe through our mouths. It didn't make it any better. As we exited the hallway and entered the administrative office, we were met with the sound of squawking birds. That almost sent me running back into the security office, but Ronnie held my arm and told me to listen. They were nothing like the squawking we heard the night before. We tiptoed to the shattered window, crunching over the broken glass, alerting the birds to our presence. A few turned their attention to us, then immediately went right back to enjoying their scavenged meal. They paid no mind to us as we took in the grisly view that the darkness of the night had hidden away from our eyes. Thousands of birds from miles around had smelled the stench of festering zoo animals and came to enjoy the buffet of leftovers the creatures from last night left behind. Entire carcasses were left behind that looked like they had been torn apart, but none of the meat was taken. Only the bones seemed to have been removed. Birds of all shapes, colors, and sizes pecked away with blood-smeared beaks at the carrion. Before leaving the safety of the office, we searched the skies for any sign of the creatures from last night. Aside from a few birds circling above, there was nothing threatening. We made our way out to the parking lot carefully to avoid slipping on the gore that coated the ground. Once I got my phone on a charger, I called for the police and told the dispatcher about what happened. I couldn't believe my ears when they told me that they would get to us in an hour or two. The storm had wrought havoc across the state, causing traffic accidents and bringing down power lines, making travel very difficult. All officers on duty were busy. Ronnie took the phone from me and tried to berate some sense into the dispatcher, but apparently even if every animal on Earth was killed, the police would still be more worried about taking care of human life first. Looking back on it now, I can see their reasoning, but after spending the night in a security office, worrying about being lifted into the air and then dropped to my death by some monster, there was no reason left in the world. We waited an hour before an officer showed up at the zoo. As he stepped out his car, he placed his hand over his nose and coughed at the smell in the air. It was beginning to warm up too. The smell would get worse as the day went on. The officer asked us what happened, and we had no choice but to tell him the truth. He didn't believe us until we offered him a tour of our newly renovated zoo. Once he finished puking, he called for backup. I imagine that the rest of the day must have been like that for everyone else that showed up at that horrific scene. It's been almost 12 years since the events of that horrible night. The zoo never reopened, and a month later, it was bulldozed, and the land was sold off to a company that built a warehouse there. Ronnie and I heard through the grapevine that the zookeepers and everyone else that worked there were told that it was closed because the owners had a change in morality about keeping animals caged up for human amusement. They were told that the animals were released into the wild or transferred to other zoos around the world. Any further inquiries led nowhere. The company offered very generous severance packages to the employees that lost their jobs. Ronnie and I were offered a substantial amount to compensate us for our troubles that night and to buy our silence. Non-disclosure agreements were a stipulation to getting our payouts and keeping them. Unfortunately, money talks, and it's very loud in the ears of a couple of guys that used to work security in a zoo. Plus, who was going to believe our story anyway? George's wife was the only loose end that the company had to contend with. She filed a missing persons report with the local police, and there was an investigation into his disappearance. The last anyone had seen of him was a security camera video showing him getting a drink at a convenience store and leaving the store never to be seen again. George never turned up. It pained me to have to keep my mouth shut about it, knowing that she was suffering the entire time. Luckily for her, it was discovered later on that George had a life insurance policy through the zoo, and Mrs. S got a pretty huge payout. She soon went silent on the matter as well. A few months after George disappeared, she moved out of town, never to be seen or heard from again. Just to be safe, I changed the names of the people involved and left out many of the specifics in case anyone from the company's legal department happens to stumble upon this. After more than a decade, I doubt anyone even bothers thinking about that zoo anymore, except for me, and I'd guess that Ronnie may think about it often as well. There are still scars from that night that will last me a lifetime. The sound of thunder sends a cold chill down my spine and sends me running for cover in a panic. I've imagined seeing the outline of the mammoth beast circling in the clouds, waiting for me to come outside so that it can fly me into the air and drop me. The deafening squawk is the only that I can hear as I plummet to earth. My bones snap on impact and everything goes dark, but I'm not dead. The smell of rotting animals awakens me from death. I see the birds pecking away with bloody beaks at the remains of splattered animals. I can't breathe. I can't think. Nothing feels right anymore. Once it passes, I'm fine again, and I can continue to live my life as I have all along, with only one lingering thought in the back of my head that continues to haunt me to this day. They're still out there. One day, those creatures will be hungry again, and the next time, they'll be bigger and looking to eat animals more like Coco instead of baboons. I was a night security guard at a parking garage, and this is why I quit. 8 months ago, I interviewed for a position as a security guard. The location was a 24-hour parking structure in the downtown area of my city. I interviewed for a daytime position, but when I was offered the job, they asked if I could work the graveyard shift. I was not thrilled. I almost turned it down. But my bills weren't going to pay themselves, and I didn't have anything else lined up, so I took the job. It wasn't so bad, to be honest. It was quiet most of the time, and not a lot happened. At first, my job was to show up at 10 p.m., work my shift, and go home at 6 a.m. I tend to be an antisocial person, so the lack of human interaction was actually kinda comforting. I didn't even have to interact with my supervisor most of the time. I would come to the office on the ground floor through an employee entrance, clock in at the computer, and then make my rounds. Now, movies would have you believe I get to sleep with my feet up on my desk while a bank of monitors light the room through the night. Honestly, I wish that were the case. In reality, there were 2 screens split into 6 feeds apiece, all crammed together so they were basically thumbnails. 1 camera for each floor of the garage. The cameras were mounted over the elevator doors in the center of each floor. They would oscillate back and forth slowly. They didn't actually catch very much. If I spotted something out of the ordinary on one of my feeds, it would be my job to go check it out. I barely spent any time in the actual office, though. I was encouraged to walk the floors and scope things out, feel out the space. I liked this. Plus, I got fresh air. That tiny concrete room made me feel claustrophobic. On most nights, I would walk from one floor to the next, casually looking between cars and into the occasional window to make sure nobody was attempting any break-ins. I preferred to take the stairs because it was more interesting than the elevators. Since it was late at night, there were actually pretty few cars coming in or out of the garage. The office building next door used the garage for their employee parking, but only about 3 employees used it that late at night. There were a few regulars that I began to recognize, and being as antisocial as I am, I only ever exchanged eye contact or a nod. The parking structure had retractable shutters in the entrance and exit of the building. If someone wanted to park, they would drive up and press a button on a console which produced a ticket. The shutter would open and let them in, closing behind as they drove through. When they left, they would put the ticket into an exit console, insert payment, then the garage shutter would slide open to let them out. The regulars or long-term customers sometimes had fob cards that were prepaid and would open the door if scanned at the console. Super exciting, I know. There were very rarely any people walking or passing through the garage during my shift. I would see people leave after parking and return to exit, but the rest of the night, it was quiet and still. If you were on foot, there were only 2 ways to get in or out of the garage: the exit-only steel door at the bottom of the staircase and the elevators. Every once in a long while, I would help someone jump their car or call a locksmith to get their keys locked inside their vehicle. Even these one-offs were rare. This seemed like the perfect job for me, weirdly enough. I would do my rounds, clock out at 6 a.m. sharp, and take the bus home. I got used to being up all night and sleeping during the day. I didn't have to deal with much. I basically just had to be there. Then, things changed. One night around 2 a.m., I heard a loud crash somewhere on the upper levels. I was walking on the second or third floor when I heard it. It was far up there, like at least 5 or 6 floors above me. It was like somebody had thrown a dumpster off the roof of a skyscraper. It rumbled through the emptiness of the concrete structure like a thunderclap. One tremendous crash, followed by silence. I stopped and listened for a few seconds afterward, waiting for anything else, my heart slamming in my ears. I took the stairs up, fueled by adrenaline. At each floor I glanced in to see if the crash came from there, then moved up to the next floor. Before I realized it, I was on the roof of the structure. Dazed, I headed back, a little slower this time. I didn't find a damn thing. My initial thoughts went to car accident, but there wasn't. I had no choice but to file a report and move on with my life. I never found the source of the noise. A few weeks passed. Then one night, I'm on my lunch break around 1 a.m., eating lunch in the office. Out of the corner of my eye, I caught a flicker of movement on the left side monitor. I checked the display closely. On the 6th floor, some jackass was running from one side of the floor to the other, then back again. It looked like an adult, or possibly a teenager with long, messy black hair. It was hard to make out any other details, partly because this person was moving fast, but also because the individual feeds were pretty small. I grabbed my big mag light and ran out of the office. Again, I took the stairs. 30 seconds later, I arrived at the 6th floor. I took in my surroundings. The figure wasn't there. I walked to the other side of the floor slowly, sweeping my light as I walked. As I reached the end and turned around to head back towards the stairs, I just caught the last glimmer of light as one of the elevators at the center of the floor slid closed. I sprinted back to the stairs, knowing I could beat the elevator to the street level. I was jumping down the last 5 steps or so on each floor, moving fast. I opened the exit-only door and pushed my way out into the street. I waited outside the elevator for a few seconds until the door slid open. Aside from some ads for the local Target, the elevator was empty. Son of a bitch, I hissed aloud. The person must have gotten off on a different floor. I jogged around to the side of the building and entered through the steel employee door. I went straight to the office to check the monitors. I saw no movement at all. It was pretty weird that somebody was running through the parking structure like that. In the end, I wrote an entry in the logbook and continued my shift, and nothing more happened until the next night. About 1:30 a.m. the next night. Lunch again. My eye caught something on one of the screens. I quickly hopped up and checked the feeds. Floor 7. A similar dark figure with no discernible features ambled into view. The person was just walking, very slowly. I watched on the 2-inch by 3-inch thumbnail as the figure shuffled directly towards the camera from a shadowy back wall. I strained at the figure on the screen, trying to make out details. Strangest thing though, it's like they were cut out of black paper. This person appeared to be completely flat, in color and volume. For your reference, the cameras in my parking structure were mounted above and between 2 elevator doors situated at the center of each floor. They oscillate on a 180-degree axis. At their leftmost position, they show a ramp with which cars descend to the next level down. At their rightmost position, they show a ramp with which cars ascend to reach the current level from below. When the cameras point straight forward, you can see a low point and the ground inclines in both directions. When I saw this strange, featureless shadow figure moving slowly from the center towards the elevators, something felt very wrong. Every time the camera came back to the center, the figure was closer. I had to remind myself that I was on the clock. My mind tried to assemble a plausible story to explain the shadowy figure. Maybe this person was lost and needed help getting out of the structure. Maybe it was a vagrant that had gotten in through the elevators and was fucking around. For a second, my memory flashed back to when I was in training. My trainer had told me that homeless people sometimes got into the structure. He told me a story about one transient in particular who would enter through the elevators and hang out in the shadowy staircases between floors. The trainer would find the guy passed out on the steps sometimes, once with a needle in his arm. I tried to convince myself what I was looking at was a homeless guy, somehow in the back of my mind. However, I knew this was not the case. This was something else. Nevertheless, I had a job to do. I got up and headed to the 7th floor. The first thing I noticed as I approached was that there was no light shining into the stairwell. Normally, sterile fluorescent light would spill into the opening from the overhead lamps. Floor 7 was dark. I clicked my mag light on and aimed it into the parking area from the stairs. At first, nothing. A white Nissan Murano sat silently on the other end of the floor. Otherwise, there were no other vehicles and no figure. Then, a shadowy shape stirred on the other side of the car. It was impossible to make out what it was from the stairs, but I could see something moving between the tires. I approached cautiously with my light trained on the car. I patted my pockets with my left hand and realized I had left my phone in the office. Stupid. As I got closer to the vehicle, I could hear a heavy scratching noise on the floor of the structure. It sounded like someone dragging a piece of metal across the ground slowly. I swung out wide, keeping my distance from the car so I could shine my light safely at whatever was over there. I took the last step and aimed the flashlight at the other side of the car. The light clicked off. "Oh shit," I blurted out, my voice echoing through the structure. I strained to make out anything now. As my eyes slowly adjusted to the dark, I could make out the basic shape of the car about 15 feet in front of me, but couldn't see any movement. The scratching sound was gone. In a panic, I smacked the back of the mag light with the palm of my hand. The bulb weakly flickered and finally stayed on. I pointed the beam of light with a shaky hand towards the shadowy spot in front of me. No one there, not a soul. Then a sound from behind me. I pivoted in that direction to see a thing slowly approaching. It was humanoid, bipedal. The figure easily stood 7 feet tall, maybe taller but incredibly thin. The thing had pale gray skin and was completely naked. It reached out to me desperately with impossibly long arms. I could see what looked like a pained expression on its wrinkled, eyeless face. Its mouth hung open, agog and filled with brown glistening teeth. Taut skin covered useless eye holes. A mane of long, tangled black hair spilled from the top of its head and past its shoulders in a matted, scraggly mess. Its fingers trembled as it reached for me. A deep groan escaped its cavernous mouth. I tried to run. Believe me. Adrenaline dumped into my system, and my fight-or-flight response engaged. In this case, without thinking, my body chose fight. I swung the mag light hard and connected solidly with its left hand. The creature let out a piercing shriek that tore through the night, echoing within the parking structure. The thing reeled back and fell over. Instead of falling prone, however, the thing arched its slender back and planted its hands and feet, running on all fours. It moved unnaturally quickly towards me. It let out another shriek, this one louder and more furious sounding. I swung the steel flashlight again, this time over my head and downward. I caught the creature square in the top of its huge head. A mist of droplets splattered on my face, but I hardly noticed. Now my flight response made its appearance. I booked it in the direction of the stairs, moving faster than I had ever moved before. My muscles tightened into knots as I grabbed the railings, skipping 5 stairs at a time. I lost my footing and tumbled down the very last section of steps leading to the exit-only door. Pain bloomed as I smashed my face into the heavy metal door. I didn't stop. I quickly rolled out of my fall and was up again in a second, running out into the quiet street. Without thinking, I dashed across the street to the bus stop and panted there with my hands on my knees. I struggled to catch my breath. After long consideration and trying to process what had happened and what I had seen, I decided to wait until sunrise to re-enter the structure. Around 5:30 a.m., I reluctantly entered through the employee door to the security room. I scribbled a note in the logbook, grabbed my shit, and left. That's the last time I ever went near that cursed parking garage. And so it goes. I don't know what I saw, and frankly, I don't want to know. I received several calls from my supervisor over the next few days, but I ignored them. After a while, the calls stopped. I am sure they will find a suitable replacement for me. I will be seeking employment elsewhere. I did learn something from all of this. I was a security guard for a store that doesn't exist, and what I saw will haunt me forever. 2 weeks of work for almost $6,000. How could I refuse? That was what I thought when looking at that bizarre listing in an email I had received. It said, temporary night security needed for local antique and clothes shop, 2-week contract, $6,000 upon completion of contract. I was shocked that it was still available when I had contacted the store. The owner had answered the call and had told me I was hired on the phone without even asking for any references or my resume. I had never actually worked security before, but I was on the larger side and trained in self-defense and knew how to aim a flashlight, so I figured I could give it a shot. I had just been laid off at my previous job due to downsizing, and even though security work is not my specialty, I told myself I would make it work for that sort of money. Part of me was thinking even back then what the catch was to be getting that much more than minimum wage, but beggars can't be choosers. I left with plenty of time to find the place and arrive without being late. It was a strange little store down a disturbingly barren stretch of road, almost 2 miles from the nearest shopping center. Kind of a bad place if they are trying to sell anything, but I guess it didn't matter as long as their money was good. I pulled into a dingy parking lot and saw a faded little sign that indicated the business was known as The Proud Tailor. They apparently sold antiques and old apparel. They must have made a solid business to pay this much for security. I wondered why it was so much and why it was only 2 weeks, though. I guessed that it didn't matter and got out of my car, taking my flashlight since it was already very dark and there was little in the way of parking lot lights out here. As I walked through the lot, I almost walked right past the entrance. I had to turn back and do a double take. It was odd, but it almost seemed when looking at it from the right angle to sort of look blurry, almost like a heat mirage. I was interrupted from the strange daze when another car arrived in the lot. I walked over to it and met my contact, Mr. Jaspin. He regarded me curtly, thanked me for being on time, and then immediately, without skipping a beat, launched into a tirade of rules for this job that I felt I would need a notebook just to write down and keep track of. "Excuse me, sir, what?" was the first of many interjections I had made when hearing the bizarre tasks I was now expected to perform at my new, albeit temporary, place of employment. Yes, I know it sounds weird, but the owner is a pretty weird man, honestly, but he pays well considering. He put on his best appealing smile and continued with the weird list. I listened with increasing incredulity to this man, who, besides the owner on the phone, was the only contact I had made thus far when taking this job. After he had gone over 6 of them, I made a note list on my phone and had him repeat several of them. "Oh my," he said in a somewhat condescending tone. "I hope your observational skills are better than your listing ones. Very well, once more, here are the rules." I was annoyed by the insult, but was ready with my note app this time. Hours of security will be from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. No taking breaks in the store. Breaks must occur in the external security booth. Lunch break must occur at 2:30 a.m. and must not occur in the building. No touching of any merchandise, especially no touching of displays. At 1 a.m. precisely, the customer bathroom must be inspected and cleaned if necessary. If there is trash in the receptacle near the back room, please dispose of in the locking dumpsters outside. No staring at any displays. Back room is off limits except in emergency situation. Trespassers are to be detained and are contact with the police if to be called to arrange removal. Is that all? I thought there was a lot, I said, half smirking and nervously laughing a bit after Mr. Jaspin had finished speaking. I gave up on humor when he glowered back at me and decided I should just listen. His friendly demeanor was broken, and he flatly stated that, "The rules are the rules for a reason. Keep to them, and there will be no problems. If you do not follow them, then we cannot guarantee you're safe." He paused mid-sentence and corrected, "Cannot guarantee full compensation for the services rendered. Please abide by them at all times." He humorlessly bid me good night and left, leaving me alone in the parking lot without even having a proper tour of the inside of the building I would be guarding or any other type of orientation beyond the meticulous listing of rules. This was really weird. and I found myself wishing I had found something a bit more run-of-the-mill and less bizarre, even if it paid less. But I reminded myself of how much money it would be, and I decided to try and ignore the nagging feeling in my gut and get to work, whatever that looked like here. I took a quick stroll around the perimeter of the store. It was not too big, but something about it made walking near and around it feel like it took longer than it should have. It felt like, with how small it appeared from the parking lot, I could be around the building in 2 minutes flat, but somehow it took me 5 minutes to get back to the front where I had started. I brushed it off as maybe just being distracted by the new scenery and the barren surroundings. Perhaps as well the unerring darkness and quiet surrounding the place. At least without light pollution, the moon was visible, but it was faint, and everything was still very dark. I decided to head to the security booth and get set up. The security room, if you could even call it a room and not just a repurposed tool shed, was very dingy. At least it was well lit, since it was so small the single overhead light bulb made it so. There was a small CCTV which appeared to be connected to 3 security cameras positioned in the store. I went to switch them on, but they appeared to be dead. I saw a note attached below one of the monitors indicating that the cameras were out of service and that a manual inspection of the building would be required at 1-hour intervals. There was an antique-looking brass key that I figured must be the store's key. I pocketed it and sat down. I was not sure what to do in the booth out here without working cameras. Just watch for people trying to break in around the lot, maybe? I figured I would patrol the perimeter every 30 minutes to get some steps in and see if anything was happening, in between checking in on the store and patrolling inside per the hour mandate mentioned on the note. I brought a few books to read while waiting between patrols and tried to get comfortable on the hard steel chair I had been given to sit on in the security station. I thought that maybe they could afford to pay so much for the security job because they didn't spend a dime on any amenities for actual security personnel. After an uneventful hour of sitting in the security shack, as I started to call it, since anything more formal would be an insult to actual security stations, I realized I had to get up and head inside to do my rounds for the first time. I grabbed my flashlight and walked to the front door again. I saw the strange distortion near it once more and wondered what in the world could cause that hazy effect. I hoped it was not a gas leak or something. I fumbled with the odd key for a moment and the door creaked open on loud hinges. It was freezing inside, somehow even colder than outside. I didn't think that was possible unless they had some sort of air conditioner on, which would be bizarre since it was winter. I was wishing I had brought a warmer coat, but I had a job to do, so I pushed inside through the frigid air and into the store proper. There was minimal lighting inside when it was closed. I was glad I had my flashlight, but still wished there were at least a few overhead lights I could turn on while patrolling. Every switch I had found appeared to be shut down, and no additional lights could be turned on. The main floor was not too large, and I decided to just do a circuit around the floor and then once through the middle and call it good. I took a small path to the right and passed some shelves with musty books and library paraphernalia. Rounding the corner, I saw some very disturbing-looking mannequins near the back wall. They were all wearing old-fashioned and ornate Victorian-era clothing. The faces and general air of the looming figures was very creepy, and I didn't like how as I walked, the heads always seemed to be facing me, but I figured I was just a bit creeped out by the strangeness of this store and would get used to it on subsequent patrols. I saw near the mannequin wall a door and restroom sign and knew that was on my checklist. I thought I might just clear it now, but the rules said to check at 1 a.m. exactly, so I decided to abide by them and check back then. I kept walking, passing by racks of old clothes and wall displays of tools off relics, and even some weapons. I didn't see anything out of order on my rounds for the first time, at least whatever order looks like for that weird store. I looked back briefly into the freezing store and closed and locked the door again and returned to the security shack. I went through the motions several more times uneventfully. I had taken my break and just read straight through it. I thought about the break rule, and I didn't know who would be crazy enough to want to take a break or a lunch in that musty refrigerator with those creepy mannequins watching you. At 1 a.m. I checked the bathroom. It looked unused, and fortunately there was no mess to clean up. I was about to leave when I saw faint red stains near the basin of the sink. I turned on the water and used some antibacterial wipes to clean it away. I didn't know what it was, but it may have been blood, so best to take precautions. When leaving, the creepy mannequins caught my eye again, and I could have sworn I saw an odd red stain on the coat of one that was not there before. I took the garbage from the bathroom, and as I was heading out, I remembered I had to check the other garbage, and looked by the back room door to see a portable garbage can. It was very heavy, and I wondered how they could produce this much waste in a day. I took both garbages out back and took them out to a sealed dumpster. Inside the heavy can was a triple-sealed bag. It smelled pretty bad, and I didn't even want to know what kind of funky shit was in it. I pulled the lever on the dumpster to lower the tray and put the bulging garbage bag on, along with the smaller bathroom garbage. I pushed it back into place and heard a heavy thumping fall and kind of an eerie squishing sound. I don't even want to know, I thought to myself yet again that night. I returned to the security shack and sat back down. The rest of the first night was uneventful, and I was hopeful it would stay that way for the next couple weeks, and I could just get my payday and not spend any more time at this bizarre place. The next 2 days were fairly uneventful, though the mundane nature of those 2 nights meant that when the hammer fell, I was too comfortable and was less prepared for the insanity of the next night. It was Thursday, my 4th night, and I had arrived a little late when I started my patrol. I had found broken glass out near the back where the dumpster was. I thought it was odd, but I was a bit more concerned when I noticed that amidst the glass was what looked like clothing fabric and traces of blood. This set me on edge, but I couldn't find anything else nearby, so I reluctantly returned to the security shack. I wished that I had been given a contact number besides the police line that, according to the rules, was meant only for then we needed to detain trespassers. I thought maybe I would make a note of it and ask Mr. Jaspin when I spoke with him next. It was time to go in the store and do my rounds. It was bitterly cold as usual, and I saw as I was walking around that some displays had been knocked over and there was a bit of a mess in the aisles. It was strange that whoever had closed had not cleaned it up. I was told not to even touch the merchandise, so I didn't know if I should put it back or not. I decided in this case it might be okay. I was not going to steal anything after all, so I bent down and started collecting a few articles of clothes and placing them back onto the clothes rack. When I finished, I looked around and was shocked when the mannequins all seemed to be looking directly at me. Not just the ones on the wall who were already facing the center, but the other ones as well. I was getting a bit freaked out, and I started to hear a high-pitched buzzing noise as well. I resolved to finish up and get out of there as quickly as I could. Then I realized to my misfortune, I had to use the bathroom just then. I ran away from the staring eyes of the mannequins and used the customer restroom where I always did, since the security shack had no facilities. When I finished, I decided to just take the trash out now and clean up the bathroom. It was only 11 p.m., but I figured I had already touched the merchandise, so why not just get the bathroom done while I was at it? One less thing to worry about later. The garbage by the back room seemed to be empty, so I left and returned to the security shack. At 1 a.m., I went back inside to do my rounds again, but something was off. The building was slightly warmer, and I noticed that a rather foul smell was coming from the bathroom. I had just cleaned there, I thought. How is that possible? I opened the door, and somehow the garbage was full of strips of bloody cloth and surgical needles, the sort of thing normally needed to be disposed of in a biohazard crate. There were other, less obvious things in the bin, and after my disgust at the smell died down, I paused and became very concerned. I had already cleaned this out. How the hell did this get here now? Was someone else here? I suppressed a shudder and decided to step outside as I was leaving. I heard the smash of glass and it sounded like it was coming from outside. I ran outside and saw a figure sprinting around the corner of the store. I dropped the bag of garbage and shouted, "Stop!" as loud as I could, but they raced on and I gave chase. They were moving so quickly I knew I couldn't catch up. Then they slipped on something and fell. As I caught up, I saw what turned out to be a small pool of some liquid. I raced over to the prone form and found a young man. He was panting hard, and what appeared to be blood was all over him. I didn't know if he was possibly a threat. He looked more scared than dangerous, but if he was desperate to get away, he could be unsafe, so I approached slowly. He was small and fairly young, maybe 18 or 19, had no remarkable features besides a faint scar over his right eyebrow and some sort of tree branch tattoo on his right forearm. "Holy shit, dude, you scared the hell out of me. What are you doing?" I asked him out of breath and trying to regain my composure. He started. "You have to help me," he blurted out, still panic-stricken about something. I didn't know what he was doing. All I heard was glass breaking somewhere, and he was there taking off running. His behavior did not seem to indicate vandalism, but why was he here? "Slow down and tell me what happened. Who are you, and what were you doing here?" I asked him as calmly as I could to try and de-escalate the situation. Okay, just... He took a deep breath and continued. "Just please listen. I need to find my sister. She was at this store or whatever this place is when it was somewhere else, and she went missing." I listened to him as panic and frenzy started welling up in his voice again. "I don't know how this place is here or why it is, but I need to find her before it is gone again." It looked like he was speaking sincerely, even though I couldn't make sense of it. "What do you mean before it's gone again?" I asked. "This place, this weird store, it was in a shopping mall. This exact store." "You mean they moved here?" I tried to clarify. "No, this exact store," he shouted back at me. "Look, friend, I don't know what you think is going on here, but I assure you, it is just us here. Your sister's not here. No one else is even here right now, and it looks like you are in a bad way," I said as I looked at his haggard appearance and the blood staining his clothes. I tried to calm him down and managed to take him to the security shack. I told him I would call the police line I was given and that they could help him find his sister. I didn't know if he was delusional or schizophrenic or something, but I figured I needed help in this case, so I finally called the number. There was a substantial wait considering it was supposed to be a police line, and someone finally answered. "Stanton speaking," was the terse and fairly agitated voice on the other line. I explained the situation to him, and I thought I heard an annoyed groan suppressed on the other line filled by a quick, "I will be right over, hold him and wait," and the line went dead. "Real cheery fellow," I muttered sarcastically to myself. The young man, who still hadn't given me his name, was sitting on the floor in the shack, not taking his eyes off the main building. He wouldn't speak anymore, but the panicked look never left his eyes. I started to second-guess myself and thought maybe something was in there. I did not know for certain everything that was in that place, like the back room, for example. Then I thought of the weird garbage I saw after I had already cleaned it. I tried to break the awkward silence and I asked him about his tattoo he had. "That's cool. What is that supposed to be?" I asked him. He paused as if considering if he should answer, then he finally responded and said, "It's a hazel branch. My sister and I each have one in honor of our mother who passed away." We waited for a little over an hour. I was wondering if the officer was going to show up and considered calling the normal emergency services, but I didn't want to get in trouble if it broke the rules. I needed that money. It was almost my lunchtime, and I was getting hungry and impatient. I was about to call again when I heard a blood-curdling scream from what sounded like inside the store. Before I knew what was going on, the man stood up and rushed out and sprinted to the main door, taking the keys with him. He knocked me out of my chair and I fell hard to the ground. I didn't have time to stop him. He was in the store before I could get up and chase after him. Once I got to my feet and rushed for the building as I saw the lights of a patrol car approach. A large man stepped out. I didn't recognize the uniform. Something seemed off. Then I realized even though he wore a police uniform, there were not any identifying features on it, besides just looking like a generic police outfit. His car too, though it had lights, did not appear to be city, state, or county sheriff. I did not know what was up, but right then, I didn't care. We needed to see what was going on inside with that scream and with the young man. I explained the situation, and the man, Stanton as he said his name, looked at his watch and grimaced. "Oh shit, why did it have to be now?" He looked concerned, and I was about to ask him what was wrong when he put a hand up and told me in no uncertain terms, "Thank you for the heads up. I will handle it from here." I was confused. Wait, handle it. Don't you need help in there? What are we going to do? I asked, trying to hide my own nervousness. No, sir, he responded curtly. It is 2:30 a.m. and you have a lunch to attend. In fact, for that matter, considering the situation, why don't you take the rest of the night off? It's not going to be safe in there, and the professionals will handle it. Wait, what? What do you mean? I stammered out. Someone is in there and possibly someone else who needs help or someone or something dangerous. Don't you need backup or something? I asked, feeling the tension increase. He paused for a moment and looked very threatening as he shifted his gaze back towards me. I already called backup. They will be here shortly. Thank you again, but you have to leave now. But don't you at least need a statement or something? I asked, not wanting to be left out of whatever was happening, since something didn't feel right. I just took your statement. Now I am afraid I am going to have to insist. As he finished the statement, he rested his hand on the grip of his firearm, and I took the hint from there. This all felt wrong. I did not want to leave, but he had made it clear I didn't have much of a choice. I considered calling the emergency line and checking if this guy was legit, but as I walked away, I noticed my phone was missing. I looked back, and the man Stanton was speaking on his own phone. I couldn't hear everything, but I made out a few words, dangerous and handled. I got to my car and was idling for a bit when I heard a loudspeaker yell out that I needed to go now. This is a potential crime scene. Clear off, or you will be prosecuted. Stanton called out by the door, holding a megaphone. I took one last look behind, and I left. I still feel guilty about that decision. I didn't know what happened, but it all felt wrong. Maybe I could have done more. I did not hear anything in the news about what happened the next day and was eager for any information. I considered calling Stanton again to see what happened, but I decided against it and called the line I had used to inquire about the position, and the line was disconnected now. What the hell was going on? I wondered. I arrived a little early just to see what happened. I thought the store hours should have seen it open right now, but it was locked up and no one was around. I wondered if they had been open at all today. I checked the security shack, and as expected, no note, no nothing, no indication of anything that had happened. I stepped inside for my first patrol, and I did not see anything amiss. The garbage was very full, but besides that, everything seemed spotless. I couldn't find anything wrong, no signs of a struggle. No one was around. What the hell happened here? I said softly to myself. I kept walking, and I heard a crunch under my foot. I thought I had stepped on glass, but I was shocked and somewhat horrified when I saw I had stepped on and crushed my own cell phone. I must have dropped it there, but I can't remember doing it. Besides having a cracked screen now, it looked like it was covered in a dark brownish liquid. I shuddered when I brought it closer to my face, and I smelled the metallic tinge of blood. What the hell? I looked around a bit more and couldn't find any other evidence of last night's events. I had a bad feeling something very wrong had happened here. At 1 a.m., I returned and checked the bathroom. It was spotless and no garbage was in there. I left, but I noticed the chill in the building had returned, and I swear I had seen a light from underneath the backroom door. Only one more work week. You can do this just one more week, I muttered to myself like a mantra and left. Surprisingly, the next 4 days did not have anything strange in store for me. Yet because of how uneventful and mundane they were, it gave me a growing sense of dread that something was going to happen. Yet day after day of tense anticipation, there was nothing. On the last day of all days, I saw the thing that I can never unsee, the thing that leads me to writing this account and trying to find any trace of that nightmarish hellscape masquerading as a quaint clothes store. It seemed like the last couple of nights at first, and I was grateful since after that night I would be able to get my payday and be done with this sketchy store. On my first patrol, I took the garbage bin by the back room out since it was almost overflowing. It was incredibly heavy, and as I pulled it along, I must have hit a large rock with a wheel, and it went tumbling over. That very same rock, or friction, or whatever force in play must have succeeded in cutting open one of the normally sealed bags, and when it splayed its contents out, I thought I was going to vomit. pass out, or scream. Instead, I just looked on in horrified confusion as there were what appeared to be pounds of bloody rags, rusted surgical equipment, and some strips of unidentifiable flesh. The gory bag was inexplicable, and my mind raced to try and find some explanation for the grisly contents of the bag. Was someone here doing illegal surgeries or something? What the hell is this? I thought of Mr. Jaspin and his creepy smile, the owner who I had spoken with on the phone but never met in person, and the weird police officer, if he really was one. I felt panic sinking in at how I was involved in whatever this mess was, trying to help them guard whatever this place really was. I had not thought to arrive too early on any day except to check for sure, but when I had, I didn't see any employees here, much less any customers. Hell, I had never even seen this store open, if it really was a store. I was wondering if I was even going to be paid, or if something bad might happen to me. I left the gruesome bag where it was. I was not going to put my hands on potential evidence, but I realized in horror as I returned to the security shack that I had indeed done just that. Now, could I really tell someone else? No one else was here, just me and a bag of bloody evidence of something having happened. If something illegal was happening, how would I prove I was not involved? It's been just me here for 2 weeks. I thought of the young man too, the intruder a few nights ago. I wish I knew what they had done with him. There were too many bad things that could have happened, and I felt sick at the implication of all of them. I felt guilty too, yet I did not know what I could do now, so I resolved to just finish the night and hopefully get paid, and then maybe put in an anonymous report when I was done with these people. I sat and brooded and became more and more paranoid as the night went on. I did not do my rounds around the store since I had no wish to pass that horrifying bag of organic detritus again. I decided near the end of the night to go into the store one more time and break one of the rules. I had to know. I had to know if someone was in the back room. Was there someone there the whole time at night? Were they responsible for the strange events that had occurred? At 5 a.m., on my last patrol, I summoned the courage to do it. I went inside, and it felt even colder than it had on previous nights. I slowly approached the backroom door and bent down to see if I saw light on the other side. My suspicion was confirmed. There was a faint glow. I paused briefly, took a deep breath, grasped the handle, and slowly turned it. It was unlocked. The smell was awful, and I instinctively recoiled before going in. How had I not smelled this on patrol in the store? I had no idea how it could be this bad and not smell it through the door, unless this was recent. I went into the nauseous miasma, covering my whole face as I did so. There was a bright lamp in the corner by the door that had been illuminating the area, and there were shelves with boxes and various office-like debris around. The back room stretched further down a small hall to the left of the door, and I followed it. This room was not so well lit, so I pulled my flashlight back out and switched it on and almost dropped it and screamed. The light, as soon as it was switched on, was shining on 2 hideous mannequins, sitting on what looked like some sort of workbench. They were both sitting upright and staring straight forward, as if watching the backroom door for anyone who came in. I let out an exhale as I tried to calm down, realizing it was just more mannequins, and regretting the action as I did since it meant I had to inhale more of the horrible air back there. Against better judgment, I stepped forward cautiously to get a better look. The faces on them were horribly lifelike, and something about it was morbidly mesmerizing. I leaned forward to get a look at the one on the left, wearing a dark sleeveless jacket that looked fancy and expensive. The face was hideous, and somehow it looked like they designed it to be in pain or some other less describable emotion. The surface looked so realistic as well, it almost looked like it had human skin. Despite the awful appearance, something looked weirdly familiar, and I noticed an old-looking scar above the eyebrow of the thing. How would a mannequin have a scar? I was puzzled. I felt a rising sense of fear as I looked at the lifelike thing, and I reached out and touched the hand, and my blood ran cold. I felt the hand, and it felt warm. I could feel small hairs as well on the surface of the skin, and my mind couldn't handle what happened next. I looked further up the arm and turned it over to see on the forearm a small tattoo of what I recognized as a hazel branch. I remember trying to scream, but only a strangled gasp escaped my mouth. I looked to the female mannequin to the right and saw on its left arm the same tattoo. My mind couldn't reconcile the horrifying truth of the situation, and then, whether it was the breathing in of the foul odor or the disgusting pouring out of what I knew to be human bodies turned into these display cases of perversion, I vomited on the floor and nearly toppled over. I stood there doubled over, panting and retching as I finally regained a bit of composure. It was then that the crowning horror occurred. I still don't know to this day if it really happened, or my disturbed mind just conjured it from the shock of the situation and the memory of speaking to that young man who had broken in that night looking for his sister. But as I stood slowly back up, there was a splitting, tearing sound like flesh and muscles breaking stitches, and I heard a wheezing, croaking voice mumble the words, "Join us." All semblance of sanity in that moment snapped, and I fled the store, grabbed my stuff from the security shack, and drove off as fast as I could, laughing like a lunatic at the impossibility of the situation. I didn't want to be implicated in the situation, so I made an anonymous call to the authorities about what I suspected was some sort of murder, body mutilation, or organ harvesting operation. I did not know if the owner, whoever he might be, would try and cover it all up, but I really was not expecting what I heard when I tried to follow up the next day. I was chastised for making a false report and was warned about wasting police time and effort, and how they did not appreciate being sent out to the middle of nowhere for serious crime allegations. I didn't understand, and I asked what they meant. Apparently there had been an investigation, and nothing was turned up. Not because of a cover-up, because nothing was there to investigate. There was no store, no business registered at that location, apparently not even a building there, just an empty patch of land. I couldn't believe it. It was impossible. I decided to drive out there and check myself. To my complete shock, sure enough, everything was gone. Not just the store, but the sign, the dumpsters, and the security shack. Everything. It is like it had never existed. How could they remove the entire store in one night and make it look like it was never here? My mind was grasping at rational solutions, but I could conjure none. I tried calling the number I had called to inquire about the job again, but it was still disconnected. I double-checked the email I had received the job listing from, and somehow it had vanished as well. I even looked online for the business, and all I found when looking for the Proud Tailor were some online shops that sold generic clothes. No odd Victorian-style clothes shops of that name in this city, this state, or even this country. Nothing. What could I do? No trace was left to investigate. No one would be able to find who owned or operated that nightmare building. There would be no closure for whoever their victims were. As far as the world seemed concerned, the store didn't exist. I started doubting my own sanity over the next few weeks. I wondered if somehow all that time had been some sort of hallucination or terrible lucid dream, or more like a nightmare. I couldn't sleep for the last few days, so I started writing down the events as I remembered them, whether they really happened or not. However, I received something today that gave me my answer, and I wish to God it hadn't. Because what I received is proof that it all happened, and I don't think I can bear the thought of those monsters still existing out there somewhere in the world wherever they went. What I received was a small manila envelope in the mail. It had no return address indicated on the front, but it was addressed to me, and when I opened it, I couldn't believe what I saw. It was $6,000 in cash. Many of the bills looked tinged by a reddish-brown substance, and a small note simply saying, "Thank you for your services." I work as an overnight security guard for a hospital. I work the graveyard shift as a security guard for a hospital, and boy, do I have some stories to tell. First, let me fill you in on the general layout of the campus. The main building is divided into two parts. The first part consists of a ground-level emergency department, an operating room on the first floor, and a child birthing center on the second floor, and the second part holds the patient units. There are 7 floors here, and each wing is used by various patient classes: cardiac, behavioral, pediatric, etc. Apart from the main building is the McCam Building, which is a historic structure that used to serve as a nursing school back in the late 1800s. It was a rectangular square building that was used partially for classes, partially for dormitories. Presently, it is used as an office space for handling management needs and things of the sort. It is only open during the day, unlike the rest of the hospital, which operates 24/7. My main duty as a security guard is to handle disorderly patients who are usually having psychotic breakdowns or high on drugs, and to patrol the premises and make sure nothing is out of the ordinary. The exterior of the campus can get a little creepy at night, and my eyes are always peeled for wild animals, especially coyotes. Truth be told, I'd rather spend my entire shift outside with the coyotes than spend 5 minutes inside McCam. I have to check it at least once a night, and I always make sure to bring my coworker with me. We hurriedly scan the building's 4 floors and move on without a second glance. We both agree that the place gives us the creeps. The hospital staff like to chatter about how hospitals are haunted places. It's reasonable. There's at least 1 death per day at the hospital I work at. This presumption, coupled with a tired mind, can give one the impression of spotting a ghost as it makes its journey to the other side. I've never seen anything remotely paranormal during my shift, let alone my life. My coworker swears he's seen unexplained shadows move out of the corners of his eyes. Our perspectives changed the night we decided to play the stupidest game ever. I was sitting in my office with my coworker Frank, shooting the shit. Our office was located just outside the emergency department, where we directed lost family members to the rooms of their respective relatives. On this particular night, a mutual buddy of ours, Mark, popped his head in. Mark was obsessed with ghosts, and the topic inevitably made its way into our conversation. "You guys ever see anything when you go through McCam?" he began. We both shook our heads. "You know that's the most haunted place, right?" I rolled my eyes. "Mark, not this again." "It's true. You know that it used to be a nursing school? Well, apparently, it was a wicked tough one. Exams were brutal. They were so brutal that nursing students began to kill themselves because they were afraid of failing out." "That's dumb," I said. "There was this one group of nursing students. It was around 1910. I can't remember the exact year, but they were so scared of failing their exam that they made a suicide pact. They all jumped from the roof and killed themselves right in front of the entrance." I looked at him dumbfounded. "Seriously? That's a load of crap." Mark regarded me with wide eyes. "You don't believe me?" "Not one bit. Do you know the glass cabinet with the creepy dolls? On the ground floor." I knew exactly what he was talking about. Near the main entrance, there's a glass cabinet that displays 5 homemade dolls that are dressed up as nurses. They stood 14 inches tall and wore those old-school nursing outfits, you know, with the red crosses. I never gave them further inspection because there was something unsettling about them. There have been problems of hooligans stealing them in the past, but never on my watch. They were indeed creepy, watching me as I did my rounds through McCam. Well, they say that the souls of those nurses became trapped in the dolls. 5 students, 5 dolls. They say that if you go to the 3rd floor, stand outside room 333 and knock on it 3 times so the 3rd strike lands just as the clock turns 3:33, the dolls will play hide and seek with you. I laughed out loud at this. Mark shifted uncomfortably. I looked over at Frank, who was also silent. "Come on, Frank. You can't actually be buying this?" "I heard about it too," Frank mumbled. I don't know how the two of them convinced me to try out this foolish experiment. It was obviously a ghost story fabricated by some bored staff member who wanted to get a rise out of his coworkers. But before I knew it, I was standing outside of room 333 in the McCam Building with Frank and Mark. It was 3:32 in the morning, and I felt like a fool. "Well, here goes nothing," I said as I rapped on the wooden door 3 times. The sound echoed through the dark hallway and faded away. I checked my watch. It was 3:33. We waited in silence for a few moments. I braced myself for something, but nothing came. "Come on, let's go." I heard a door close downstairs and I nearly jumped out my skin. I looked at the other 2, who were equally as shaken. I grabbed Mark firmly by the shoulders. "Are you fucking with us?" I hissed. "Is someone pulling a prank on us?" Mark violently shook his head. I could see the terror in his eyes as my flashlight illuminated his face. "We need to check it out. Could be a trespasser, I hope." We slowly descended to the first floor. As we came into the hallway, I wondered how frightened we looked. I led the way with Frank close behind me, while Mark was literally glued to his ass. We probably resembled some demented version of the Mystery Gang. I flashed my light on all the doors. None were open. My light came to the cabinet, and my heart leapt into my throat. Yup, they were gone. "We're fucked now, boys," Mark said softly, and crossed himself. I turned to him. "Mark, I swear to God, if you are pulling a fast one on us, I'll throw you off the roof myself." When I said these words, a chill swept through me. The temperature must have suddenly dropped 10 degrees, and I shivered. The air itself almost felt depressed. A whisper drifted through my ear. "It started. We have to find them, or something bad will happen." It was Frank. "Can't you feel it? The negative energy?" I could. I motioned toward the nearest door. "Come on," I said. We crept around the first floor, opening each door with great anticipation, not knowing what was in store for us. To my relief, the floor was empty. There was still no sign of the dolls. We gathered in the hallway and were about to make our way up to the second floor when we heard a slight patter above us. It sounded like 3 or 4 children were running around overhead. Pit-pat down the hallway toward us, then a pause, then pit-pat in the opposite direction. This happened 3 times. Then it stopped. Shit, I thought to myself. "Oh, fuck that," Mark whimpered and turned toward the door. My hand shot out and found his elbow. "Don't be a pussy. We're in this together." I could see Mark's face glistening with sweat and his eyes wide with terror. We climbed the stairway with great caution. We clung to each other in fear, savoring each breath as if it were our last. When we came to the hallway, we were greeted by the slight tinkling of bells. The source was coming from the far end of the hallway. I shone my light into the darkness. Nothing. The faint tinkle warmly greeted us. I wanted to turn and run, but something was drawing me in. I slowly led the group toward the sound. I reached one of the doors and stopped. I motioned to my ear and pointed beyond the door. The other 2 nodded. I gripped the doorknob and slowly let myself in. On the other side of the door was a bathroom. It was one of those old dormitory bathrooms with a rounded sink in the middle and undivided latrines on both sides. In the porcelain sink were 3 dolls. I cautiously approached them and slowly extended my hand, as if the merest touch would set my hand on fire. I picked one up. It wore a white nurse's dress with a red cross on the right breast. On its head was a white cap with another red cross. Its black hair fell over its face, covering the features. I swept its hair back to reveal a faded, smiling face. Its porcelain skin was icy cool to the touch. I shuddered. We each returned a doll to the cabinet. 2 to go, I told myself. Mark and Frank were silent, exhausted from the terror of the night. I was relieved that they were with me. If I had to do this by myself, I think I'd have lost my mind. "Do you think we ought to split up?" whispered Frank. "Cover more ground that way?" I wheeled around and faced him. "No. Don't you watch horror movies? No matter what happens, we cannot split up. If the entity is malevolent, it'll kill us when we're alone. If anything, we should tie a rope around us so we don't get separated." My logic trumped their fearful state. Besides, I felt much better with Frank and Mark close by. Glued at the hip, we went to the 3rd floor and inspected it thoroughly. We couldn't find any dolls, and I kept my ears pricked for any noises. When the 3rd floor seemed safe, we climbed to the 4th floor. While in the stairwell, the sound of running footsteps greeted us. We must be getting close to another one. As we stepped into the hallway, the footsteps faded, and we watched a door slam shut. making all three of us jump in unison. What came next made my balls crawl up into my body. You know that cheesy child's laugh in Roller Coaster Tycoon? The one you hear over and over again, which makes you want to punch that kid in the face. Well, hearing that same laugh now filled me not with frustration, but terror. Raw, uncensored terror. To my left, Mark was praying. Frank remained as stoic as ever. Together, we inched our way toward the door that had closed moments before. I braced myself and opened it, expecting the worst. Nothing came, and I looked inside. The room was empty, save for a ladder that disappeared into a hole in the ceiling. The night sky greeted us. Of course, they would hide on the roof. After a quick game of rock, paper, scissors, Frank climbed the ladder first, with me close behind. We stepped onto a small stone patio. From the roof of the McCam building, the main part of the hospital looked inviting. I caught myself wishing that I was in my office and not playing this stupid game. Look there. Frank pointed to a small figure in the corner of the patio. The doll was propped up against the stone railing that overlooked the main entrance. I picked the doll up and looked over the railing. It didn't look so high from here. I wondered if I leapt from here I'd survive. I grasped the railing and began to hoist myself up when Frank called out, "Hey, what are you doing?" I froze. What the hell was I doing? A spell of vertigo gripped me as I backed away from the railing. Did I seriously just consider jumping off? I shook it off. "Come on," I said sullenly. "Let's go find that last doll." We searched McCam for what seemed like hours. We thoroughly swept through the 4 floors twice without any luck. I was starting to feel more irritated than annoyed. The strangest part was that there were no more weird noises. I started to question if there were only 4 dolls to begin with. If there was a 5th doll, we would have had to start tearing up the floorboards to find it. Our search for the 5th doll came to an anticlimactic conclusion when the sun's rays made their way into the hallway, filling it with a lavender glow. A wave of relief rushed through me, but in the back of my mind I still regretted that we never found that last doll, if it ever existed. Things started to get weird since we played that game. Every morning around 3:33 I hear the pit-patter of small feet run by my office, or if I'm on patrol I hear a child giggling. These things always last a couple of moments, but it always scares me when it happens, even though I expect it. I have returned to McCam since that night, but there are only 4 dolls on display behind the glass. I could have sworn there were 5. Come and find me. I worked as a night guard at a grocery store. They left a strange set of rules. I saw the job listing 2 weeks ago. Wanted, night guard at West Market in redacted, PA, 12 a.m. to 6 a.m. shift, $21 per hour. The whole thing struck me as odd, right off the bat. What kind of grocery store needed a security guard while it was closed? Was the crime really that bad? But I needed the money. Badly. And 2 days later, after a phone interview with a man named Clive, I showed up for my first shift. As soon as I pulled up, I sort of understood why they needed a night guard. The grocery store sat at the edge of a rundown strip mall. Large signs reading "Space for Rent" hung in the store windows. But judging by the dusty glass and flickering street lamps, no one had taken them up on the offer in years. I parked near the front door, and as I approached the building, I saw a woman hurrying away from the store. "You must be Aaron," she said breathlessly. "The night guard?" "That's me. Clive left you some instructions." I put them on the conveyor belt at Register 1. She gave me a polite nod and then stepped around me, heading for the only other car in the parking lot. "Oh, thanks." "Be friendly," my inner voice scolded. "She's your new coworker." I turned around. "Hey, what's your name?" But she was already diving into the car. The door slammed, the car reeled out of the parking space, and then she was gone. So much for a new friend. I turned back towards the store. The parking lot was completely empty now, and the nearest streetlight was flickering with an odd, erratic rhythm. A cold wind swept in, whipping a crumpled paper bag across the parking lot. Well, here goes nothing. I stepped up to the store. The glass doors squeaked as they parted for me, and then I stepped inside. Despite its outward appearance, the store was actually pretty nice inside. Bright fluorescent lights shone from overhead. Jazzy music played from hidden speakers. I headed over to Register 1, where a folded piece of paper was waiting for me. I flipped it open and began to read. Dear Aaron, welcome to the West family. We sincerely hope you enjoy your first shift. To help you, we've compiled a list of rules that should make your shift as easy as our fresh-baked apple pie. 1. As night guard, you are expected to patrol the store every half hour, making sure nothing is amiss. You may spend the rest of your time in the break room at the back of the store, monitoring the security camera feeds. 2. Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. 3. If you hear a knocking sound coming from within the freezers in the frozen food aisle, ignore it. 4. If you see a shopping cart that hasn't been put away, please return it to the shopping carts at the front of the store immediately. 5. Do not be alarmed if you find a pool of blood in the meat aisle. Sometimes our meat packages leak. Simply head to the storage closet, get the mop and bucket, and clean it up. However, do not step in the puddle or touch it in any way. 6. If you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room and stay there until she leaves. Do not call the police or report a break-in. Do not make eye contact with her. 7. The music we play throughout the store is a pre-recorded disc of instrumental jazz. If the music ever stops, immediately go to the break room and stay there until it resumes. 8. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Thank you so much, and again, I hope you enjoy your shift. Clive. I stared at the rules, rereading them slowly. They were so weird. A woman in the store? Avoid aisle 7? I'd never been given instructions like this, even when I worked as a bouncer at a nightclub in a bad part of town. Maybe it was a test. They wanted to see how well I could follow instructions, no matter how absurd they were. I looked up at the security camera, staring down at me from the corner. Okay, challenge accepted. I glanced at my phone. 12:06. Might as well get my first patrol out of the way now before getting settled in. It was odd walking through the store when it was so empty and quiet. All the breads and muffins had been stored away somewhere. White opaque plastic had been pulled down over the vegetable display to keep the cold in. When I got to the end, I made a right into the meat section. Sheets of plastic had been pulled over the meat coolers too. I saw flashes of red through the gaps, of massive ribeye and sirloin steaks, big slabs of meat with the bones still intact. I averted my eyes. While I wasn't a vegetarian, I never really liked the sight of raw meat. I turned instead to the aisles. Aisle 3, pasta and sauces, all lined up on the shelves, glinting in the fluorescent light. Aisle 4, cookies and snacks. Aisle 5, aisle 6. Oh right, I wasn't supposed to look at aisle 7. I forced myself to look down at the floor. Yeah, it was stupid, but they told me not to look. In the off chance they were going to check the CCTV footage later to grade my performance, I was going to follow every rule. I continued further into the store. A few minutes later, I found the break room, a nondescript brown door with a little square window cut into it. I took note of its location for later. As soon as I was done with this patrol, I was going to break out my laptop and finish watching Friday the 13th 4. And then I was at the west end of the store, the frozen section. I turned down the aisle, heading back towards the front. That's when I saw it. A shopping cart parked askew in the middle of the aisle. I huffed. Of all the rules, this was the one that annoyed me the most. I was hired to be a security guard, not a cleanup crew. Wasn't it the employee's job to put all the carts away at closing time? Sighing, I began pushing it towards the front of the store. The wheels rolled smoothly underneath me. The jazz music played softly in my ears. I turned the corner and walked past the cash registers, heading towards the front door. That's when I heard it, a soft sound, barely audible over the jazz music. I stopped, straining my ears to listen. Several seconds of silence went by, and then I heard it again. It sounded like someone crying. The hairs on my neck stood on end. There's no one in here. The door's been locked the whole time, unless a customer had accidentally stayed past closing time. Maybe that employee, the woman I'd run into in the parking lot, didn't notice them and locked up before they could get out. "Who's there?" I called out. A wailing sob in response. My heart plummeted. It sounded like a woman or possibly even a child. "I'm coming!" I called, breaking into a run. "Where are you?" They didn't reply. They just kept sobbing. I frantically continued in the direction of the sound, calling out to them, telling them everything would be okay. But then I stopped dead. The sound. It was coming from aisle 7. "Do not go down aisle 7. Do not look down aisle 7. The rules had been very clear about that. I stopped just short of the aisle, next to an end cap display of mayonnaise, and carefully positioned myself so I was hidden. "I'm going to help you," I called out. "Can you tell me what happened?" They finally spoke, but they didn't answer my question. "Help me," the voice cried through more sobs. Please." I wanted to step into the aisle. My foot was already halfway off the floor, ready to run in there and comfort them. But something stopped me. A gut instinct, a little alarm bell going off in my head. Because out of all the aisles, what were the chances this person would be in aisle 7? And besides, they were safe. They were in an empty store with me. It's not like they were in a dark alleyway in the middle of the night. "Come out of the aisle," I called, my voice shaking a little. "Then I'll be able to help you." "Please," the voice replied. "Help me. This is stupid. Clearly some person got stuck in here after closing time, and they're scared. Just go into the aisle and help them get home." But there was another part of my brain, the instinctual, lizard brain part, and it was screaming at me to not move a muscle. "Do you need me to call someone?" I tried. "Your parents or family? The police?" "Help me," the voice pleaded again. The "help me." It sounded the same each time they said it. A little stutter at the beginning, an emphasis on me. It almost sounded like a recording or some AI-generated thing looping over and over. It didn't sound natural. "Come out of the aisle," I shouted. "Come out and I'll help you." The sobs got louder, faster, hysterical. "Help me," the voice pleaded again in a desperate tone that made my stomach twist. I stood there, pressed against the mayonnaise display. Listening to them sob was making my stomach flip-flop, even if it did sound slightly unnatural. I could call the police, I thought. They'd know what to do. Except I'd left my cell phone with my backpack at cash register 1, and getting it would mean crossing aisle 7. The rules didn't say anything about walking past aisle 7. They just said I shouldn't go down it or look down it. And I couldn't just stand here and do nothing. What if it really was someone who needed help? A child who'd sprained their ankle and couldn't get up? "Don't worry. I'm getting my phone and calling the police," I called out. Then I took a deep breath and stepped across the threshold of aisle 7 towards register 1. As soon as I took a step, the crying stopped. Just like that. Violent sobbing, and then, in an instant, nothing. Like a switch had flipped. Then the footsteps started, loud, slapping footsteps of someone running down the aisle, way too large to be a child, coming straight at me. My heart dropped. It's a trap. They're coming for me, and I'm probably going to die here. But as soon as I made it across the aisle, the sound stopped. All I heard were the soft jazz tunes playing through the speakers overhead. I hightailed it to the break room, completely forgetting about the cart I was supposed to return. The break room was small and cramped. The little square window in the door had been blacked out with construction paper from the inside. The only source of light came from the computer screen on the desk, displaying the security camera feeds. I scrolled through the feeds. I quickly noticed that none of them offered coverage of aisle 7. It seemed like the cameras were intentionally placed to avoid that aisle. After searching the grainy black and white video for anything amiss, I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. When I finally opened them again, it was almost 12:30. Time for my next patrol. I didn't want to go. I felt safe here, locked up in this little room. But I also knew I wouldn't be safe if I didn't listen to the rules. I shuddered, imagining what would have happened to me if I'd gone down aisle 7, if I hadn't listened. I pulled myself out of the seat and headed for the door. The store was completely silent, no hysterical sobbing or pounding footsteps. I started my patrol near the back, walking up aisle 17. Cans of food glinted on the shelves as I passed, but when I glanced at them, I didn't see any labels I recognized. No chef ravioli or giant green men. Just generically labeled cans of meat stew. In fact, all the aisle had was meat stew. The same cans, over and over and over. I reached the end and turned right, towards the front of the store. And that's when I realized that I had already broken one of the rules. The cart. I hadn't returned it. It wasn't where I'd left it. Instead of haphazardly being parked near aisle 7, it sat next to one of the cash registers. Like some ghost man was checking out his groceries. I paused for a second, hands hovering above the handle. Then I grabbed it and headed towards the door. Outside, the parking lot was pitch black, not a single street lamp. The shopping carts are only a few feet from the door, I told myself. Just go in and out. It'll take 2 seconds. I did it as quickly as possible. I ran into the darkness, slammed the shopping cart into the row, and dashed back inside. Then I shut the doors and clicked the lock. Okay, that wasn't too bad, I said to myself, letting out a sigh of relief. For a second, I reveled in the peace of the store, the silence, the safety of being locked inside with no one else with me. But then I stopped. The silence. Oh no. The jazz music wasn't playing. How long had it been off? I'd been so preoccupied with returning the cart, I wasn't even paying attention. I broke into a sprint towards the back of the store, cookies and snacks flashing by me. Then I swerved right and sprinted into the break room. I pulled out the list of rules and read them over again. Do not, under any circumstances, end your shift early. Why did he write that? Was it just because he didn't want anyone flaking out on him? Or if I left early, would some horrible fate befall me? Because I really, really wanted to leave. I opened my backpack, pulled out the soda I'd brought, and popped it open, took a sip, scrolled through the security feed. 5 more hours. The next 4 patrols went fairly well. The rules didn't say how long they had to be, so every 30 minutes I sprinted a lap around the store as fast as I could. The whole thing only took about a minute. Then, for the other 29, I locked myself in the break room. On the second patrol, I heard knocking as I ran down the freezer aisle. It started as light tapping across the glass, then crescendoed into loud thumps, like someone was slamming their palms against the glass doors. As per the rules, I ignored it. I just kept running until I made it back to the break room. On the last patrol, the music had cut out again, so I quickly detoured and got to the break room as quickly as I could, the silence ringing in my ears. And now, here I was in the break room, with 3 hours left. I stared at my phone's clock, ticking slowly towards 3 a.m. I stood up, shaking out my nervous energy, preparing myself to sprint. I'd been a runner back in high school, but in the past 10 years, I'd gotten way out of shape. The last patrol had left me panting and breathless, legs aching. My hand closed around the doorknob. My heart hammered in my chest. 3, 2, 1, go. I wrenched the door open and shot out into the store, but I didn't get very far, because there was an enormous pool of blood on the floor. I froze, all the air sucked out of my lungs. I stared at the blood, shining in the fluorescent lights. The rules said to clean it up, but that would take at least 10 minutes. I wasn't safe out here. I swallowed. Then I hurried to the supply closet, got a mop and a bucket, and started cleaning as fast as I could. The job was messy. I slid the mop through the blood, then dunked it in the bucket. Rinsed and repeated. The soapy water tinged red. A few times it splashed up and almost landed on me. But I did it. I cleaned it all up without touching a drop. Unfortunately, by the time I was finished, it was 3:27, time for my next patrol. I was too tired to run, so I settled for a brisk walk around the store. I headed up through the frozen food. I noticed now there were handprints on the glass doors, handprints of all sizes. tilted and smudged, except the proportions looked all wrong, with fingers that were too long, too thin. I averted my eyes and kept going. 2.5 more hours. My footsteps clicked against the tile floor. The jazz was starting to grate on my nerves. I must have heard the same looping saxophone melody 20 times now. It made me want to punch something. Sighing, I continued towards the produce section, briskly walking past the aisles. Then I stopped. Something caught my eye in one of the aisles. I backed up and took a better look. Someone was standing in aisle 9, a woman. She wore a blue linen dress and black high heels. Long black hair cascaded down her back, almost to her waist. She faced away from me, standing still, her thin white arms hanging limply at her sides. In her hand was a basket filled with cuts of raw meat. The rule echoed in my head: if you see a woman in the store, immediately go to the break room. Do not make eye contact with her. I slowly backed up, as quietly as I possibly could. Then I started down the next aisle, towards the break room. Click, click, click. I heard her footsteps echo against the tile. I hurried my pace towards the break room, but then I stopped. Her footsteps weren't coming from behind me. They were coming from in front of me. I averted my eyes to the floor, just as I saw 2 black, high-heeled shoes step into the aisle. I stared at the floor. Do not make eye contact with her. Do not make eye contact with her. The words repeated over and over in my head. But I had to get to the break room, and she was standing in my way. All I could see were her shiny, high-heeled shoes, and the little drops of blood that leaked out of the meat packages in her basket, staining the floor. I backed up. That was the only way I could go. I kept my eyes on the floor, careful not to look up. But she was following me. Click, click. For every step I took, I saw a shiny black heel come into view, attached to a thin white calf extend, keeping time with me. I quickened my pace. So did she. Click, click, click. I wheeled around and broke into a sprint. Click, click, click. I ran down an aisle at random and sprinted towards the break room. But then, halfway down the aisle, I stopped. A shopping cart was parked across the middle of the aisle, blocking my way. Not just one cart, several of them, stacked up in a teetering tower that was nearly as tall as the aisles themselves. I was trapped. I backed away, my heart pounding. Click. Slow, methodical footsteps coming towards me, slowly, like a cat stalking its prey. I took my chances. I turned around, sprinted back out into the open, and stepped into the next aisle. Oh no, I knew it instantly. A tattered lump of gray clothing and sickly pale blue skin sat on the floor. The person, the creature, the thing folded in on itself, in a pose reminiscent of a crying child. But it obviously wasn't anything resembling a human, with its strange lumps and appendages and complete lack of head. I'd stepped into aisle 7. I immediately reversed direction, but not before the thing unfolded itself and began to move towards me. I whipped around and, screaming, sprinted down the next aisle. Miraculously, I made it to the end in one piece. I veered sharply left towards the break room. Almost there. Almost there. My hand hit the doorknob. I wrenched it open and dove inside. Then I collapsed in the chair, panting. I sucked in a breath, staring at the locked door. Am I really safe in here? Technically, the rules never said I would be safe. Maybe staying in here only decreased my chance of death. I turned my attention to the security camera feed on the monitor. It showed the middle of the store, and from what I could see, the aisles were empty. No trace of the woman. I switched to the next feed. The produce section. Empty. I switched to the next one. I jumped. She was standing right there. In front of the break room door. She stood so still. The image could have been a photograph, except for the blood slowly dripping from the meat in her basket. I swallowed and glanced away from the monitor at the door. My heart slammed into my ribs when I saw her shadow under the door. Go away, please, go away, I pleaded in my mind. The shadow of her head in the window tilted, as if contemplating her next move. Now I knew why the window had been covered. I forced my eyes away and looked back at the screen. She was still standing there, except there was something different about the way she was standing. I squinted at the grainy black and white image, trying to figure out what was going on. When my eyes finally fell on her heels, I realized. They were facing forward, but I was still looking at the back of her head, at the long black hair cascading to her waist. Either her hair was hanging over her face, or she'd turned her head all the way around. It must have been 20 minutes before she began to walk away from the door. I couldn't tell if it was just the low frame rate of these crummy cameras, but her movements looked jerky, her body lurching with each step. It made me sick to watch. When she disappeared from the screen, I let out a breath of relief. My hands and legs were shaking, weak. Okay, think. The rules said to wait until she left. All I had to do was watch the feed by the front door. As soon as I saw her leave the store, I'd be safe. After a few minutes of sitting there, waiting for my heart rate to return to normal, I forced my fingers back to the keyboard. I pressed the arrow key to move to the next feed, then the next, and the next, looking for the camera at the front of the store. No. Her face filled the entire screen. Her eyes filled me with horror. They were pure white, no pupils, no irises, just pure white eyes threaded with spidery veins. I screamed and jumped back. Then I shut my eyes. The rules said, don't make eye contact. Did that count? Through the screen? I let out a terrified, shuddering wail and covered my face with my hands, my entire body shaking. When I finally took a peek through my fingers, I saw her, rapidly scaling down the wall, away from the camera on the ceiling, like some kind of spider. Then she pushed through the glass doors and disappeared into the night. She'd left. I was safe, or as safe as I could be in this cursed grocery store. I glanced at the clock. 3:58 a.m., time to patrol. I really didn't want to, but I forced myself to swing the door open and run as fast as I could through the store. I saw shopping carts stacked in teetering towers, heard hands pounding against the freezer doors, saw little spots of blood on the shiny tile from the woman as she'd stalked me, and then, a minute later, I was done. I locked myself in the break room and for the first time in years began to sob. The remaining patrols went by without incident, though I did hear more sobbing from aisle 7 and more banging from the freezers. And then, the hour had come. 6 a.m. My heart soared at the sight of the pink dawn sky through the glass doors. I was safe. I was free. When I glanced out into the parking lot, I saw a few cars pulling in, disgruntled, groggy employees clutching coffees, heading towards me. As soon as the first one came in, I flew out of the store, ran to my car, and got out of there as fast as I could. I'd never felt such relief, such happiness. I felt like a new man. All of my problems, even my financial ones, seemed dwarfed by what I'd just endured. When I pulled onto the main road, I rolled down my windows and flicked on the radio. But it wasn't my usual classic rock station that blared through the speakers. Instead, I heard the upbeat tune of a saxophone, and as I listened to that horrible, looping melody, I realized that my days as a night guard for West Market may not be over yet. I'm a low-level security guard at a top-secret government facility, and whatever's inside it is about to escape. I was told the facility's contents were above my pay grade. I was just the security guard who let the government agents, or G-men as I called them, through the front gate. They came and went in an endless stream of perfectly tailored gray suits and hats. After they marched through the gate, they disappeared within the featureless doors. There was nothing to break the monotony, not even a card that wouldn't scan or a G-man asking for help. Everything operated with complete, bleak efficiency, and all I did was press a button. I used to wonder what was inside the facility. I don't anymore. Speculation was futile, and all my questions were ignored. No one was willing to talk. I wasn't even allowed a phone to pass the time. Instead, I contented myself with books. and reading became part of my routine. For 20 years I guarded the gate that didn't need guarding. It was a life comfortable but dull, and the books I read became a blur in my mind. I fantasized about office jobs with inconsiderate coworkers and unreasonable deadlines. I envied the underpaid retail workers who had the thrill of loud, rude customers. Anything had to be better than this, but still I stuck to my job. In retrospect, it wasn't a bad living. It was better to be bored and sleepy than scared. It all began with the G-man whose card wouldn't scan. I was halfway through a book, eyes half closed, but the beeping of the scanner made me look up. The G-man seemed surprised. He paused, as if struggling to adapt to this sudden inconvenience in his perfectly efficient, top-secret routine. Then he procured a working backup card, and I was already opening the gate before my half-asleep brain could respond. He was gone, and I realized I had no idea what my book was about, so I started over from the beginning. The next day, the same thing happened. The same beeping aroused me. I let the G-man through, and then he was gone. But I knew something wasn't right. It was 2 failed scans in 2 days, when before there were none. I was awake the rest of the day. I looked closely at everyone who came. The same perfectly tailored gray suits and hats. The same perfect efficiency. But look, doesn't this one's tie seem a bit crooked? His suit has a small blemish. He's walking too fast, isn't he? Over the next week, there was no more beeping, but every G-man that arrived seemed a little more disheveled and hurried than the last. Some of them were practically straining to cross the gate before they had scanned their card, and they all carried guns. Had they all carried guns before? Then another card didn't scan. The G-man produced his backup card in a flourish, but instead of opening the gate, I turned on my microphone and asked hoarsely, "What's going on?" The G-man replied, "That's none of your business." He was glaring at me, daring me to ask another question. I let him through. It was my job after all. When another card didn't scan, I didn't bother. As the G-man reached for his pocket, I pressed the button. He hesitated, shooting me a glance, then hurried through the open gate. For some reason, I felt vindicated. I'd surprised him, interrupted his routine. That was when the rumbling started. At first, I refused to believe it, but it was unmistakable. The facility was emitting a low rumbling, and a steady drone filled the air. The G-men were getting scared. They arrived missing ties and gripping guns. As the rumbling became interspersed with loud banging and crackling, they became increasingly tense and agitated. Whatever was in the facility, it was out of their control. For a while, I was excited. Their routine was in tatters, their perfect efficiency gone to hell. The G-men had made me suffer in monotony, and now, whenever I benevolently opened the gate, it was with a deep satisfaction. They were getting panicked, careless. When my shift ended, I began finding lost things on the ground. An oily ring, a shattered loop, a blood-stained handkerchief. I brought them back. The rumbling became a backdrop in my mind, low-sounding and ever-present. I could see nothing from the outside, but the sound never went away until I left. Tonight, that changed too. As I drove home, I almost didn't notice that the rumbling followed. The highway seemed deserted, but when I became aware of the rumbling, I glanced in the mirror. There was a dark figure following the road behind me, and it was rapidly gaining distance. I slammed on the brakes and dove out the door. My handgun was already cocked, and it flashed once, twice, again. The figure fell to the ground, and I ran over, switching on my flashlight to shine on the body. What I saw confirmed my suspicions. It was a G-man with a perfectly tailored suit and hat, immaculate save for the hole in the middle. The handkerchief in the suit's front pocket was stained blood red. I would have reached into his pockets, except then there was a loud bang, and looking up I saw some more silhouettes in the far distance coming my way. I jumped back into my car and fled. That was hours ago. I'm safely home now, but I can still hear a faint rumbling. I really shouldn't go back to work tomorrow. Yet there's some strange desire in me to go back. I have a job to do, after all.